Hey guys, I wanted to do a very quick introduction for context to this rather long video, which is my friend Joelle. She's an amazing coach and she has a community of coaches who are building their businesses. And a lot of them, they are considering launching their own podcast, or maybe they already have theirs and they want to go to the next level. And they had questions around it. And if you clicked on this video, chances are that might be your case too. So Joelle created a masterclass where I answer all the questions of her students. So it's a little bit like a podcast where she asks me the question. And I believe there's going to be a lot of very valuable information in there. It was originally for her paid community, but I asked her, could I share that on my YouTube too? And she agreed. So thank you so much, Joelle. And you're in luck because you can have access to all this. So enjoy. And at the moment, I'm doing some market research to refine my next offer. So you'll see a link in the description. Definitely hit me up if you're a conscious leader who's starting or want to start their podcast. And even if you're watching this later, there'll probably be a link to connect with me. So without further ado, enjoy this masterclass.
So we are here today with Alex, and Alex is an amazing podcast host. You have been having your podcast for over 5 years, if I'm correct. And he's an amazing leader, coach, and he has also done my advanced coaching training. We know each other a bit more personal. And I just really want to invite you today to share more about podcasting, because I believe it's a great way to establish yourself as an authority and also to upgrade and up-level your communication and being able to be seen more on a bigger scale. But at the same time, it can also be overwhelming for people. Maybe people don't really understand how to do it, or it feels like this really big process. And what I like about your work is that you make it very simple. So I hope that for today, this masterclass is going to help you to learn more about podcasting and to see, is that something for you, maybe now or in the future? And especially how to make it easy and fun and not too complicated. So thank you so much, Alex, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to dive in. Thank you for everyone tuning in also.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about yourself and why you are doing what you are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go quickly. I started my podcast actually 7 years ago, and that was at the same time as my spiritual awakening. And one of the things out of many that triggered that spiritual awakening was listening to a lot of podcasts, for example, Tim Ferriss and others. And that gave me a lot of education that I didn't receive from school, education on relationships, on business, on spirituality, on health, on many things. And so I kept listening a lot to podcasts, but I also wanted to be part of the game. And since then, it's been a beautiful journey that got me to learn a lot from the people I've had on my podcast. I think close to 250 episodes now, and also to connect with these people, make a lot of very interesting friends, and also to grow my brand. And now it's become also my business as a podcast coach.
And why did you decide to go for this specific niche of podcasting coaching?
Yeah. So basically, I'm here on Earth to co-create the new Earth. I call it, to assist the awakening of humanity. And so part of it is living more in harmony with each other, with ourselves, with animals, with nature also. And so there's many ways in which that translates. And so I'm very multi-passionate. And I think that's going to speak to you and to a lot of people watching. Is often in our community, people have a lot of interest in health, in relationship, in business, in spirituality. And so in the past 7 years, I've done a lot of things. And the podcast is a reflection of that. We've talked about tantra, meditation, crypto, raw foods, conscious businesses. And about a year ago, I focused on coaching. And so I explored the different niche I wanted to do. That's when I was doing some coaching before, but went like really full on professionally into it. And I looked at the podcast as the thing that stood out the test of time the most. And I was a little bit, let's say, not a fan of building things that I would outgrow 6 months or a year after. And I was like, okay, what can I do for like 5 years at least? And podcast was the thing where I felt, okay, I feel like my podcast is a life's work, and I'm still going to be passionate about it in 5 years, in 10 years. So it made sense to me to dive into that specifically.
Yeah, I love that. It's so good to choose something that you can do long term and you can really dial and anchor in so that you're specific. And it doesn't mean that on the other hand you don't have still space to express yourself in different ways, right? You're just becoming more hyper specific, and then you can still express your other passions and other things in other ways. How do you feel about that process now that you're going a little bit more into a niche right now and speaking more about the topic podcasting instead of having all of these different topics on your podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, niching or not is definitely always a tricky thing. I know it is for coaching, and usually it's the same also for podcasting. Like, how much do you want to niche? And to me, it boils down to mainly, it boils down to your interests. What are your interests? Are you already more naturally a specialist or a generalist? And then it boils down also to your goals. Let's say if you have a podcast that you want to mainly as a support to your business, and your priority in the short term is to make money. Well, let's say if you're a health coach and your priority is to get clients, I would advise you to start a podcast on health. And if you're even specific, if you're a health coach who helps mom in their 40s lose 10 kilo of belly fat after pregnancy, well, I would encourage you to niche your podcast on that, because that's what's going to give you the best ROI, and that's your priority. Now, similar as to coaching, in podcasting, when you niche, it can feel a little bit more limiting. So if you're, let's say if you're doing well with your professional life and you want to start a podcast really mainly purely out of passion project, or to learn, to connect with people, but you want to interview who you want when you want, then you would be better like non-niching too much, because consistency is also important. So with a podcast, you can change your name, you can change the niche, but in general, it's better if you're consistent. And so if you just force yourself into a niche and in 4 months you're really bored of that topic, well, then you need to rebrand, and that's not ideal either. So generally, the rule of thumb is niche as much as possible, but knowing that you still want to talk about it in 5 years.
I love that so much. And also that you are approaching these two different approaches. So two different goals, actually. One, if you want to monetize your business, you want to earn money, and you want to build up your clientele of your ideal audience, then make sure that your podcast is super specific and focused on those clients. And if you want to have your podcast maybe to become more empowered in your leadership and to speak about different topics, and also to meet, because I like that you are also doing this, like have been doing this a lot in the past, to meet people that you're inspired by, and then to have a chance to connect with them because you're inviting them on your podcast and you're learning through that way as well. But that's a different purpose. So this is good to start with. Yeah. What is your purpose? What is your goal?
And actually, to add on that, like personally, I do something that I wouldn't recommend to someone who's not a podcast coach, because you don't want to make it too overwhelming. But personally, now I have two, which is I have the Light Leaders, which is my life's work that I don't want to niche, because I want to keep having a passion project podcast where I can interview who I want, when I want, and sometimes to learn from them, sometimes to connect with them, sometimes because I know it's going to get a lot of views, sometimes I know it's going to be good for business. And I can have different intentions per episode, but I want to keep it relatively broad. Is just tailored for conscious leaders, people who want to raise the consciousness of our planet. But then we can get into health, into relationship, into spirituality, into business. However, this is not best practice for business. And I can have 10,000 views on an episode, and that won't bring me any business, because if I do an episode on raw foods, maybe only 5% of them want to start a podcast, or maybe less. So it's not targeted. So it's not ideal for business. So I started a different one because I wanted to play also in the arena of the more niche business. So I understand also better the specificities of each. And it's not so black and white, it's more of a spectrum. But basically, I wanted to have both and separate them well to play with both. And I didn't want to let go of my passion project one, but I'm just clear that one is more passion project and also supporting my learning curve on that, supporting things. But then I have both now.
I love so much that you say this because me and my husband, we have had the desire for a long time to start a podcast, but actually it doesn't have to do anything with both of our businesses. Like my business is all about helping coaches to become better coaches and to help them to build their coaching business. My husband, he's all speaking about reality creation and manifestation, subconscious mind reprogramming. So for our podcast, our desire is actually to speak on relationships because we feel like this is such a big passion of us and we want to share about it. But we see it as a passion project to be able for us to utilize the podcast, for us to express and experience ourselves in that way, and maybe also host some one-on-one retreats here in Bali. But we see it more like as a passion project than as a funnel. Now, if I would choose to build a podcast for my business, then that would be specifically related to coaches and helping coaches and leaders and facilitators to build their coaching business and to become better in coaching and in leadership and facilitation. Yeah, I think this is so important to clarify.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then what I ask people is just to be honest with themselves, because sometimes when you start something as a passion project, are you able to sustain that? Like, do you already have the level of time and revenue that when life happens, you're still gonna do it right? Just be honest with yourself when you do.
Yeah, and this is the consistent part, right? And I think that one of the reasons that many people are resistant to build their podcast is because of the idea like that we don't have time and it is very overwhelming. And we need to stay consistent. So how can we commit to something that maybe is difficult to stay consistent?
Yeah, totally. Then we can dive into the fact that now in our day and age, it's become easier to have a podcast.
Tell us, we want to know.
Actually, one thing that made me want to get into the podcast coaching sphere was that now thanks to AI and the improvement in technology, it makes it actually much easier to have a podcast where you post every week, for example, than it used to. So 4 or 5 years ago, if you wanted to have a high quality video podcast, it was almost a bit of a full-time job, or you'd need to have a big team to help you. And so a decent investment of time, money, and energy. In the world of today, using tools like, I really like Riverside for online interviews, but also with AI, there's a lot of ways to optimize editing. And then I use ChatGPT to do my YouTube description. So there are a lot of ways to optimize in a way that in about 3 hours a week, you can post an episode every week. And that includes recording, post-production, and promotion. Of course, that's more if you do like let's say 40-minute type of podcast with people. So you can post weekly, high quality with that amount of time now. It wasn't.
Wow. So 3 hours, including the podcasting itself?
Yeah. If you record like something like 40 minutes. So if someone records 40 minutes, I usually say, well, it's going to be more of a 1 hour recording because you want to talk to them before and after, and about 1 hour for post-production and promotion. And then an extra hour would be to find a guest and a bit of communication here and there. And that's if you want something good, but of course, then you can spend 3 more hours working on the thumbnail, 3 more hours working on the clips. Like there's always a way to go deeper, but that's for something that looks pretty good, high quality on your YouTube, maybe on your Spotify, and a couple of clips on Instagram that are generated by AI with a couple of tweaks here and there that you've done manually.
Beautiful. So for the people who are getting serious about wanting to start a podcast, how would you describe the process? Can you take my people can you guide them to, okay, what is the process exactly?
Yeah. The process is to first have a little sit down and understand your goals and the positioning. So I don't want it to become too big that it leads to perfectionism and procrastination, and understand that a podcast is actually fairly easy to pivot. The analogy I often use is if you write a book, you can't write 4 chapters and then realize you want to talk about something else in a totally different way. And also, if your first 4 chapters suck, well, no one's going to read chapter 5, 6, 7. But with a podcast, it's different because people, they get to know you from your more recent episodes. And then only the true fans, they go and dig and look at episode 1 and 2 and 3. So it's much more forgiving and lean in that way. Now, I would still take a little bit of time to do a little bit of market research, a little bit of maybe working with your coach, or filling into, okay, what are my goals and how do I want to position and design that podcast? So that's usually when I work with people, it's like maybe 1 week of diving into the podcast positioning and then getting clear on the goals, because it's a lot of micro decisions. So do you want to do audio only or video? Usually I'd recommend video. Where do you want to post? I'd usually recommend YouTube because that's where there's the most traffic. And so asking yourself all these little questions. How do I promote the short form? Like I use Instagram. I love to do collabs when I have guests. Do I want to have guests? How long are my episodes? And if I have guests, is it online or in person? So, and then you can do a mix. My podcast, if they're here, it's in person. If they're in the US, it's going to be online. And so understanding that positioning first, that's the first step. And obviously, like the topics, the niche, the name. So you sit down, you're like, okay, I'm going to talk about that. That's going to be where I post. And that's the format. And then I would start building basic processes on it. It doesn't have to be too much or too overwhelming, but just understanding which tools am I going to use. I recommend Riverside for online recording. And then how am I going to edit? Who's going to do it? Riverside takes care of that for the most part too, so I would recommend that. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, I'm going to do my thumbnails with Canva, and I'm going to use ChatGPT to do my descriptions and chapters, or you can use Riverside for that too. Mm. So that would be like positioning, processes, and then I would start also already creating the platforms like the YouTube, Spotify, and starting, if you have guests, to invite people. Mm-hmm. So that's typically after 2-3 weeks. Even week 2, you can start inviting people, and week 3, you can start recording. And then week 4 usually is when you launch. So then you can do, I recommend usually launch with 2 episodes, one solo where you introduce the podcast, and then one would be a typical example of what you do. So if you have guests, that would be with a guest. Mm-hmm. And then you're launched in less than a month. So that's how I would recommend a blend of do it fast, but at the same time, think it through and position yourself for long-term success.
Yeah, and I think that you are emphasizing on having a specific amount of time to set yourself to, because otherwise you can procrastinate and you never really start, right? It just stays with an idea.
Yeah, you could speed it up, you could make it longer, but that's typically a good range.
Beautiful. And what would you advise for people who want to utilize their podcast for building their business and get more leads and convert more sales? Would you advise them to just speak about their own audience, to speak alone, solo, or would you advise them to have a guest over to interview?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And well, first we talked already about then the importance more of niching down. So a little distinction of that, I would definitely niche down the branding, make it niche down to align with your business. Now you could have sometimes an exceptional episode where, okay, you really want to interview that person on relationship and you're in your health niche and you're like, hey, I'm going to do something special today. Like, it's okay. Or if you have a conversation with someone, you can like still have that person and go into small tangents sometimes on other topics. So it doesn't mean you have just to repeat yourself and be very boring all the time. You can play around a bit, but I would keep this as the core. That's the first thing, niching down to align with your business core. And then I would be strategic. So you can mix things, but just understand like what's the goal is to get clients. So then, for example, having just interviews where you ask questions and you don't show any of your expertise is probably not a very good idea, because then you're like building the expertise of other people, but not yours. So it's not going to translate very effectively into people being curious about working with you. So you have a few things you can do. One, obviously, solo episodes, as you said, they work really well because people connect with you directly and you can share your medicine directly and give a taste of what it is to connect with you. Then another really powerful thing can be having your clients on your podcast talk about their transformation, for example. Then people have a direct experience of your work. So that would work really well. And another one would be that's quite creative, but it could be also to have your potential clients on the podcast. I've done that with my own podcast, where I've had people who want to start a podcast. And the idea with this is not only you give the audience an experience of working with you because you coach that person, but also that person could directly become a client. So that's a strategy you could have, for example, if your ideal client is someone that could be hard to reach, and having them on a podcast would be a great way to create that connection. Then you can actually use the podcast not only to convert your audience into client, but your guest also. And then the fourth thing I will share is that you can still have interviews with leaders in the space, but then either you can be strategic about, okay, that person is such a big name and they're going to share the podcast, that this podcast is about expanding my reach. And so this podcast will build the authority more of the other person, less of yours. But if you're going to reach out to so many more people that then get to know about your podcast and watch the other episodes, that's still going to be very beneficial. Or if you have that guest, you could also make it in a way that's more conversational, where you share your expertise. So on my podcast, I've had people where it's more an interview because they just get that big authority. I want to learn from them. The audience wants to learn from them. Or sometimes I've had a guest where maybe it's 50-50, or maybe I briefed them before, or maybe it's like I speak 40% of the time, like they say something and I'm going to add on to that. And then it's more like a conversation where I also share about my knowledge and my authority.
Yeah, beautiful. There's so many different ways how you can do it, right? That is like so beautiful, such a creative process. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think that it's also in terms of when you are creating your podcast, what do you do when you don't know actually how to reach audience? Like when you don't have an audience yet, maybe you're just starting out, you don't have many followers yet. Like what would you do in terms of that?
That's a really good question. Well, first, that's why I prioritize YouTube, is that YouTube, especially if you're niched, people can find you even if you're not known. So on Spotify and on iTunes, people aren't going to search. They aren't so much going to go on Spotify and say how to build a six-pack in 1 month on Spotify. They don't really search that. What people do on Spotify is they know you and they're like, I'm going to subscribe to that podcast. So if you don't have an audience, though, on YouTube, there will be people who might search as like how to build a six-pack in 2 weeks at 25-year-old. I don't know, like whatever. Or they will go on YouTube and be like, how to save my marriage. Things like this, you know? Yeah. So especially if you're very niche, people can find you on YouTube with these things. So that's why I prioritize YouTube for this content, is that it is a search engine. That's one way. Another way is to have guests that have a big following that will agree to do collaborations with you and to cross-promote. So what I say is, as a rule of thumb, you can go 10x. So if you have, like I have close to 6,000 followers on Instagram, I can reach out to people with about 50 to sometimes even 100,000 followers on Instagram and be like, do you want to be on my podcast? And they'll say yes.
I think this is super good because maybe people think, oh, I have to have so many followers to be able to be even ask someone for that. Yeah, but what you're sharing right now is that actually you can already ask someone to be on your podcast when you have a big difference in followers. It doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, people love to be interviewed. People love to be asked for podcasts. So in general, that's very realistic. Now, of course, if I go to Tony Robbins, I won't get an answer. That's why I say 10x.
Yeah.
But someone like 50,000, I've had people with 200,000 followers accepting collabs on Instagram, and then my podcast is shown on their Instagram page and their stories. So that's an easy way also to get more traction, even if you don't have followers.
Yeah, so then it's not only about making sales, but it's also really about growing your audience and growing in authority and visibility.
Yeah, but then again, being close, like being more precise with your goals will help, because with this strategy, maybe you get views, but maybe it's not the right people, right? So maybe you'd rather have a conversation with someone who's much more targeted to your audience and have less views. In general, for coaches, it's going to be better to have the right people. So that's a question I often ask to people is, would you rather have on average 10,000 views on your videos, but not many leads, or would you rather have 500 views per videos, but get like, I don't know, 3 or 4 leads for each videos? And for most people, the second one will be better and more sustainable.
And how do you create that? If it doesn't matter so much that you want to be like big on big stages and you care more about like earning money and building the foundation of your business, and you want to have leads, what would be the best way to utilize your podcast for that?
Yeah, I mean, we touched upon it. I would say you can have guests, but then show a little bit more of yourself when you have them. And then you can do more solo episodes. You can do having your clients, if you have your clients already share the transformation. So on this, there's a lady called Kima Mani. I don't know if you know her, but she's in the like sex coaching space. And her podcast is very often her interviewing her past clients about their transformation. And then the fourth one that I mentioned was interviewing people who could be potential clients. So that's, you do it as a lead generation strategy. So this would only work for things people are proud of. So for example, if they want to build a business and let's say you're a coach, you help people go from 10K to 20K months or 50K months, then they might want to go on your podcast and talk about like their achievement, but how they want to go to the next level, right? If you have men with premature ejaculation, they probably don't want to come on a podcast to talk about their premature ejaculation, right? So that it will only work for certain people. Those people, they'll only want to come on your podcast once it's solved and they've become an amazing lover and they're proud to talk about it. So you need also to adapt your strategy to the market and what people are ready for if you do it, especially for lead generation.
And when you're doing a solo podcast, how is it with the fear that some people have, like that you share all of your knowledge, right? Like, what do you actually talk about when you have a solo podcast to grow your audience and to get leads and to create intimacy with the potential clients? Like, how can you, what are you actually talking about? Because maybe people are afraid that they share so much knowledge and then they kind of like are a very inspiring person, but people don't actually buy. Like what is the advice that you would give them what to exactly talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with, I'm not a specialist in that. I'm figuring that out myself. In general, I like the idea that there's so much information that I like the idea of not gatekeeping information and that people are going to pay for things like accountability, community, proximity. Basically, they're not going to pay because I have this information and they have to pay for it. They can have the information, but then, yeah, they want to do it faster. They want to do it with personalized feedback, and they are going to pay for that. So then how it goes is then for me, it's I'm just sharing content about things that I feel will help people. And but ultimately, like a lot of people in the space that do really well say there's definitely an art of how you share things in a way that help them buy. But I'm not a specialist on that. I'm more a student of that at the moment.
Yeah, beautiful. And I believe that the podcasting is such a great way to share your story, your personal story, and to create more intimacy. That this is also one of the big reasons to start a podcast.
Yeah, and by the way, usually I refer to podcasts and YouTube channels because there's a spectrum from a podcast, which is more like usually either people think with a guest and interview, or they think if it's solo, more like, okay, I'm going to talk about my life and sit in my living room, versus YouTube, people think very educational. But there are also some people who do YouTube videos where it's called talking heads and they're speaking. So that can be considered as a podcast, but where they're a little bit more also to the point, and it's also really educational in that way. So there's a fine balance between the educational YouTube video and the solo podcast.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about that? The difference between educational content on YouTube and when you have a solo podcast that is more for generating leads?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the educational on YouTube might be even better to get the leads. But let's say, I mean, some people post on YouTube like you do a solo podcast. They share vulnerably about their life and talking about it. And I would still recommend that because just YouTube is such a big platform and it's more, it's got a lot more engagement. So, but then in the style of what you can do is, yes, you can go more into, okay, I'm going to do 45 and 50 minutes where I talk a lot more about my life and I free flow more with it. Or you can go more into, okay, I'm going to do with like something that works often is like you have a whiteboard and bullet points. So it's like a 20-minute kind of presentation with a whiteboard. And so this could be, this is like borderline podcast, but it can work really well for leads.
Borderline podcast.
Yeah.
And how would you use your podcast for Instagram? If you just want to use your podcast for growing your Instagram, how would you?
That's a good point. Yeah, podcasting is an Instagram strategy too, which is good for people when they feel a little bit overwhelmed, I have to do this and that. So with a software like Riverside, you can actually use AI to extract good-looking clips from your podcast interviews. So it's actually very fast to then have a lot of content on Instagram. And then on top of that, you can leverage the collaboration feature with your guest. So not only you have content, but you have content that your guest is going to share on their page. So you can have a very strategic intention also to get people on your show that have a good Instagram following. And here's the trick. I also make sure I have a bit of time after my podcast to connect with my guest. And as part of it, ask them if they're, provided they like the clip, if they're cool to accept the collab and share in their stories. And they almost always say yes. But if you don't do that, the chances of them doing it is much lower. I actually have a pre-interview form where I also already say, hey, I'd love to share clips on Instagram. Would you like that too? Are you open to sharing in collabs? And so it's like they've said yes twice, so they're actually going to do it.
Beautiful. And the tech part, like that is one of the biggest parts that I think people are feeling resistance to. And you've already explained that there are some tools that you can use. Can you express a little bit more about how to make the technical part more easy and the editing part?
Yeah. So for the tech part, I would say it's good to sound and look good. And at the same time, I wouldn't want it to come in the way. So of course, if it looks good, sounds good, it's going to help a lot. But if you don't have the shiniest studio, you can still do really well. Actually, if you go on my podcast, The Light Leaders on YouTube, and you look at the most popular video, a lot of them are online recordings. And I used to have a studio, and most of my studio interviews with 3 cameras I'm doing as well, because the content and how relevant it is to your audience is
Yes.
important. Yeah.
This, I want to highlight. Can you say it again? Because I think this is one of the ways how we procrastinate so hard.
The content and how relevant it is to your audience is more important than the quality of your production.
There we go. Yes, receive that fully.
Quality of production is cherry on the cake. Well, of course, if your audio is totally inaudible, that's totally gonna wreck it down. So you want the audio to be okay, for sure.
What do you need to have the fundamentals? Like if you don't want to have like the 3 cameras in the professional studio, but you just want to start from home and you do want to start, like what would you say, what do you need for that?
Yeah. So right now I'm recording on my iPhone 15 without any external mic. And that's often what I use. Very easy to use on the go. It's on the front camera because I like to see myself, and here I need to see you also, of course. And these are good. Then I use clip mics when I have a guest, and I only record 1 camera with my iPhone 15 and with the 2 mics. And that's really good enough. And then when I record alone, I can do it with my iPhone 15 too. Or if you have a new MacBook Air or a good MacBook Pro, you can do it with your webcam and the mic, and it's actually really good already.
Amazing. And what you've been sharing as well is that it doesn't matter if you record it horizontal or vertical, because you can use it with the Riverside, you can use it for horizontal videos, but then also for vertical if you want to use it for Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, so people can check also on my Instagram profile at Alex E. Limber, and the YouTube is The Light Leaders, and they can see how it's done. But basically, well, shoot horizontal because you want that for the end recording, for the long form. But then what an app like Riverside will do is, contrarily to Zoom, it will record files locally and you can rearrange them in different ways. So probably this recording is going to be either us side to side, but in kind of small windows, or if you chose the speaker view, it's going to be switching each time there's a speaker. But with Riverside, what it does is when it puts us side to side, because it's going to crop us like this, so it takes the whole screen, which looks much better. And also it's going to have an AI switch between us two or speaker view, because sometimes it's nice to have a bit of a zoom on the speaker, but sometimes it's nice to have the 2 of us. So it's going to do things like this. And then when you do a reel on Instagram, it's going to, instead of having us side by side like this, it's going to have us on one on top of the other. So that's good, because if you take just a Zoom recording and you need to crop and put them on top of each other, it doesn't work really well, right?
Amazing. Yes. So recording one video, you have so much creativity to utilize your content in so many different ways. Now, there's also people that have a podcast with just audio. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think they're leaving a lot on the table there. I think even because for the reasons I mentioned, one is discoverability on YouTube. So yeah, you could still post on YouTube with a static image, but it's not going to work really well. And unless you have really incredible content, if you really niche, have something very unique, you can still. And also because of the Instagram strategy I mentioned, then you can use the videos for reels, right? And same, if you do an audiogram on Instagram, it's not very likely to work as well. Also, you create more connection when people can see you. So I would recommend to do video, even if you just film like with your iPhone, even if you have an older iPhone that's not as crisp in quality, I would still record video and prioritize video. There are a few examples, like there's a lady, maybe you know her, Jenny Dinovi.
Yeah.
She's actually not on YouTube. Her podcast is, I think, only on Spotify, maybe iTunes, but she still films herself because she puts stuff on Instagram, and she has a really nice podcast. So There's a few exceptions, but yeah, on YouTube you have people like you have quite a lot of people who are just speaking to a camera. There's an account called actualize.org. I think he has 3 million views, and it's just him speaking for 3 hours. And then maybe people just leave it in the background, or I have YouTube Premium so I can stop it and listen to it as a podcast. But it's just much better for discoverability, interactions also. People can leave comments and likes. Analytics are really good there. So I would do video even if it's just you in front of a camera.
Yeah, because there's also a lot of people, they just listen to podcasts when they're cooking or when they're walking the dog or anything like that, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean people are gonna watch you if you do a 2 hour where you're talking in front of a camera. It doesn't mean people are gonna watch you the 2 hours, but they'll be able to find you on YouTube to check in a bit with you, and yeah, I would. So I think that's why video is more important. Now, if it's gonna make you procrastinate, you can start with just audio too.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a good way to, if you're still insecure in front of the camera, however, we are working on that in this program, that you feel more secure and confident in front of the camera. And start already with a audio just to for your voice, like to be able to speak more freely. It's a practice, it's an art, it's a skill to learn. How is that journey for you with communication? Maybe in the beginning you were also not so secure as you are now. Can you share a bit more about that?
It's super important. We haven't talked about it, but the imposter syndrome and the limiting beliefs that come with starting that. So I think what we've talked about so far is a little bit more angle that people who already have that confidence and that business running, and they're like, okay, I want to reach more people, I want to get more leads. But there's a whole personal growth journey of starting a podcast, depending on where people are at, for sure. And in that way, for example, if starting the audio podcast could be a tremendous breakthrough for the person. So in that way, it's very valuable. When I was talking about the video, is because the people I work with and the angle I have is that those people are usually more ready, let's say. But for the personal growth angle, just doing the audio and starting to express yourself this way can be incredibly beneficial. Yeah, when I started imposter syndrome, who am I to have a podcast, all these kind of things, and then I did it anyway. I got some exposure therapy by doing it, and we know it's just a game, watch the fear, but do it anyway.
Watch the fear, but do it anyway. Exactly. Yeah, and I love that you're sharing.
One more thing is I like to tell people, if you feel imposter syndrome, it's actually a good thing because it shows that you're growing and you're doing something outside your comfort zone. So take it as a good sign. And I mean, I'm sure as a coach, like you're very knowledgeable on that. You're the one who gave me that term, exposure therapy. I love what you shared about it, about like finding that sweet spot, right, between doing the thing that you're scared of, not letting the fear stop you, but at the same time doing in a way that's not overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Finding that sweet spot. And I love that you talk about this because this is something, yeah, this practice is a big part of the training. So yeah, you all guys, you are utilizing this right now, also in speaking in front of the camera. And I think that this is the beautiful journey, right? For me, example, I also want to do more podcasting, but I know now I'm recording my trainings. So I know I don't have so much space to do all the other things, but I know it's coming. So it's like step by step. And I'm happy that I created the space to do less one-on-one sessions and to be able to be fully focused on creating my online programs. But when they are recorded and they're finished, then I can go all in on visibility, on speaking on a larger scale, like step by step by step. For some people, it works to do many different things at the same time, also depending on your lifestyle and what you are, like if you have a job, a side job or anything like that. And for some people like me, it really helps to be dialed in on one thing and to become a master in that, or actually become not like fully mastering it, but establishing myself in that, and then go to the next skill and go full in. Yeah, for me that works the best.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you're in a stage in your life and in your business where it's like, okay, if I'm going to do a podcast, I want it to be worth it and I want to do it well. well, there's a time for people where it can be, okay, I'm just going to record myself on YouTube because they need to break a fear that they've had, and that's going to be the learning curve. And
Yeah, so that is also two different phases, right? There's one phase where you are, maybe you don't have an expectation to get leads yet, but you just want to practice and you just want to free your voice from being able to speak freely. What is your advice on this? Because maybe people are thinking, yeah, but if I'm a solo podcaster, how can I speak for like 40 minutes?
yeah, actually, it's an interesting thing, because can I ask you, I think we've gone for like 45 minutes or so already. Like, how complicated has it been for you to have that podcast so far?
For me, well, I haven't really dived deep into podcasting.
I mean, this discussion, like, has it
For
been
me,
a lot of steps for you?
this is so much fun.
It's so easy, right? Super flowing. You just ask me question, I answer. And same for me. I'm just answering you and we're having a conversation. It's really easy. So my point with this is, talking alone in front of a camera is easier tech-wise, because you can just put your camera, your phone, your laptop and speak. But in terms of skills and raising those insecurities, it's actually much more challenging. So what I found out is often it's going to be actually much easier to have a conversation with someone when you're starting than it is to speak in front of the camera. If you sent me those questions before and you were like, can you do a video of yourself talking about this, it would have been much harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Because there's no interaction. You have, yeah, exactly. And this is also something that we're working on in the training, how to do that.
So a way you could do it is, you could literally, if you want to do a solo and talk about your thing, you could literally either have questions written down and even write them to yourself and answer them. If that doesn't feel natural, you could even have someone ask you these questions, and then maybe you even edit out the person if you.
This is a good tip, a good advice. Yeah. So you are having someone, maybe your boyfriend or your partner, your husband, you have him there, or maybe a friend that you feel very comfortable with. And then you're kind of going in interview style and you edit out the questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have some more tips about that? I think we're covered already so much, and maybe you can just share, what do you think for my students? What are some last advices and some tips that you would really want to for them to take with them?
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, we've covered a lot already, but I will just say, for me, it's been a beautiful life journey. And you know, there's obviously all the things we talked about getting the views, about getting the clients and the leads, but it's also really such a great way to connect with people. And it's like, you can, if you play the game of status, you can really connect with people who are higher status, who inspire you in certain ways. So there's going to be a lot of benefit to doing it. So there's that balance between, of course, you want to do it right, but also not overthinking it. And also understanding that it's something that is more needed and growing. So if you followed a little bit of the US presidential election, one of the reason Trump got elected is that people trusted him more because he could sit down 3 hours with Elon Musk and have a genuine conversation. And in the age of a lot of short clips and a lot of fakeness and a lot of AI, people actually really enjoy that you can sit down and talk to them like a normal, imperfectly perfect human being. And so yeah, there is that trend of a lot of AI, a lot of short clips, but there is also that demand as a reaction to that for genuine, calm, grounded, authentic conversations. And these can be either when you have a conversation with someone like this, or it can also be even when you do your solo episodes. Maybe you don't need to cut the poses.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need to like remove this part that was a little weird. There's a lot of people who do well where they actually don't cut their podcast. I've just recorded one today. I prepared it. I had bullet points.
Mm.
It's good to have an understanding of where you're going with it and what you want to share.
Mm.
But then showing yourself as an authentic human being and having people feel like they're speaking to a genuine person can really be nice. And you're going to attract the right people too. It's going to maybe repel the people who want to be very excited and entertained with things popping up all the time.
Yeah.
Will attract the people who like to sit down and just enjoy conversation. Like recently, for example, I've been listening a lot to Rich Litvin's YouTube channel. So you probably know him, the author of the Prosperous Coach, and some of these recordings, they're coaching sessions. So it's like, you know how it is. It's like take it slow, leave the pauses, leave the blanks, and that's those silences are also part of the vibe and of the teaching.
Yeah, that people really get to feel that authenticity. I love that. Yeah, that's so beautiful, especially in this time of where you can cut and editing everything out and polish it fully, but it can actually be a strategy to be authentic and to just share your realness and your nature. And also, I believe people love to see your growth. What I'm constantly sharing in this training is that you don't have to be on top of the mountain to help people that are just starting out on the mountain. You don't have to be on top of it to be able to help people to get onto the mountain and to climb the journey onto the mountain. The best thing actually is to know where you're going and you have a mission and your vision. You know you're going to go to the top and you're taking people with you that are behind you and you're taking them with you in the same direction.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's really important for people who want to be mentors, that they don't need to be a 10 out of 10. So similarly, if you're a beginner golfer, you might be okay with someone who's a 6 out of 10. You don't need to learn from Tiger Woods, right? Maybe it's probably not a good idea. He's too good for you. And then when we look into coaches, because I know you explained me actually, the mentor and the coach, like the coach can work with people who are widely more successful. Like you can coach a billionaire without being a billionaire.
Yeah.
And same in sports, you can coach athletes even if you weren't top athletes. And actually, that's something I'm going more towards is I was a little bit more positioned, helping people who were earlier like on the business journey to like let's say to grow, and they were like maybe behind me, but now I've actually shifted a bit where I'm like, instead of thinking who can I inspire, I'm like, who inspires me and how can I help people who are ahead of me already.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Wow, that's such a different way of thinking. How can I help people that I'm inspired by? Yeah, I really love that. What is the way how people could work with you? What are you offering?
Yeah, so I'm still doing tweaks to my offers, but basically I'm looking for people who are already more established in their practice. So I mean, if we were to put a number of it on it, it would be, let's say, if you're a coach doing at least 3,000 a month, like sustainably, and I want to go to the next level with. So either you want to grow your revenue, and you want support with. So especially people want to do a podcast, but usually it's going to be more than that. So let's say you do 3K, you want to start your podcast, and you want to, but you also have a lot of things in your business that you could automate in your backend. Then it's like, okay, we're going to start a podcast plus help with Instagram strategies and finding guests and do a lot of done for you, basically, where it frees up a lot of your time. And so you can grow while not having a lot more time to put into it. So it frees your time to do the things you really love and to grow your business with the things you really love through a podcast. But I'm also, what I find is in general, even if we start speaking about the podcast, it might end up being also the Instagram strategy. It might end up being finding the right tools for landing pages and email lists and some of those things that some healers and coaches don't really like to do and don't have as part of the zone of genius.
Amazing. So you're helping people to free up time and to make the process more easeful for them, and especially around the editing part of the podcast building. But then also it can go further towards like launching pages and Instagram and all these things.
Yeah, let's say the core offer is to take care of almost everything for the podcast. So you just show up and speak and do your thing. And it can be even booking guests and preparing that.
Amazing.
The promotion, and then also things around it that can be personal brand building and system building.
Amazing. That sounds so good.
Yeah, and so a mix like of there's some coaching, but also some consultancy and more even agency where it's done for you.
Exactly. And to round up, I have a beautiful opportunity to speak with one of my clients in terms of that you have done the advanced coaching training. So for the people who are now in the online confidence community, would you want to share a little bit about what you got out of the advanced coaching training and why you would recommend it?
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I think, well, some of the things I've shared in this conversation are actually inspired by it. So, for example, that distinction between mentoring and coaching. And I think in general, just releasing the pressure of needing to know, of needing to be ahead, of needing to be perfect, of needing to inspire.
Yeah.
And really coming with less of an agenda and more of that confidence of I'm here to be present with that person. I'm here to be curious and to be of service, and that just this can already be enough. So that was really helpful for that. And then also some practical strategies on how to help people to get those breakthroughs too.
Yes, it was such an amazing time to be in person here in Bali, to have the training in person. Now we have the online training, but yeah, the ability to be together in person in this training was really special. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you still want to share or that you want to, before we round up, that you want to end up with?
I will just say, like, if you feel the call to not let this overwhelm you, for sure.
Yeah.
Simple things we've shared, and even if you do it as a passion project, there's going to be so much that comes out of it. I think in life there's only so much that we can. It's good to be intentional, but there's only so much that we can plan and prepare, and that's going to open a lot of doors. And so we can't connect the dots fully now, but in retrospect, you'll be able to connect those dots, and the podcast is gonna open a lot of doors.
Yeah, let it be a creative process. Okay, thank you so much.